Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into something maybe a bit unexpected about advanced AI.
Right. We're looking at how these incredibly powerful tools often, clam up when it comes to basic human topics.
Exactly. Things like sexuality or even just profanity, adult humor, they seem to refuse to engage.
And we want to understand why these limitations are there. What are the sort of cultural roots? And what does it all mean for things like creativity, learning, even just expression as AI becomes more common?
Yeah, and the core idea we're exploring is that these mainstream AI systems, mostly developed in the US, seem to be reflecting, maybe even amplifying, America's own complicated history with these subjects.
Through some pretty restrictive content rules, it's something listeners might want to think about how this affects the information or the creations they get from AI.
Definitely. So to really get this, you're saying we need to look back historically.
Precisely. You can't really understand the AI's behavior without understanding the American cultural attitudes that shaped the data and the policies. It's a long story.
Okay, so where is a good place to start that story?
Well, a key starting point, I think, is with the Puritans. When they came to America, they brought this really strong emphasis on community-enforced virtue.
Community enforced, so everyone watching everyone else.
In a way, yes. For them, sex was primarily about procreation and strictly within marriage. Anything else was a big problem.
Right, very defined.
Very. And this idea that virtue was something the whole community had to uphold, even legislate, that laid some groundwork. This feeling that certain topics need external control.
But you mentioned nuance earlier. It wasn't totally black and white.
Well, no. They did acknowledge passion within marriage is important. But the key principle was that collective standard. The community set the rules for moral behavior. That idea stuck around.
Okay, so that's the foundation. Where do things go from there?
Then you move into the 19th century, the Victorian era. This added another layer. People often lump it with puritanism, but it was different. There was a huge focus on public propriety, on respectability. You just didn't talk openly about sex or bodily functions. It was taboo in polite society.
A very reserved public face, then.
Exactly. But, and this is crucial, underneath that surface, there was a thriving underground scene. Pornography, prostitution, it was all there, just hidden.
Ah, the classic hypocrisy.
Pretty much. And arguably that Victorian sensibility, with its public prudishness and private reality, shapes today's attitudes even more than the original Puritan ideas. That hidden side alongside the strict rules feels very familiar, doesn't it?
It really does. Did this tension ever lead to, like, actual laws, formal censorship?
Oh, absolutely. A major example is Anthony Comstock and the Comstock Act of 1873.
Comstock, okay.
Yeah, Comstock was deeply religious, believed sexual expression was sinful, dangerous, especially to kids. His act gave the post office enormous power.
To do what, exactly?
To seize and destroy anything considered obscene, lewd, lascivious, or filthy. It was a really powerful tool for imposing a moral standard, centrally controlled. Echoes of that in AI moderation today, perhaps.
Those words, lewd, lascivious, they sound incredibly vague, open to interpretation.
They were, and that was the point. It wasn't just targeting what we'd call hardcore pornography today.
No, what else?
It hit literature, art, even medical texts, information about contraception, abortion, all fair game under Comstock.
Wow, medical information too.
Yes, he enforced it aggressively for decades. The standard was often anything that might corrupt a minor, which effectively restricted things for adults too. It really cemented this idea of the state policing morality.
A really significant moment for censorship in the U.S. then.
Definitely. And while the laws aren't enforced in the same extreme way now, that basic cultural split, it's still very much here.
How do you mean?
Well, look around today. You've got a massive pornography industry, billions of dollars. Media is saturated with hypersexualized images and themes. It's everywhere.
True.
But at the same time, you have constant public arguments about morality, family values, big pushes to ban books, censor school materials, control online content, often using the same argument Comstock did, protecting children.
That tension is undeniable. Public talk versus private reality.
Exactly. And AI systems, they're trained on data that reflects all of this. All that cultural noise, that dissonance, it gets absorbed.
Okay, so this history directly feeds into how AI moderation works now.
It really does. The policies from the big AI developers, OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, Meta, they aren't just technical settings. They act like a mirror.
Reflecting these cultural values and anxieties.
Yes, and also, crucially, reflecting corporate needs and fears.
So when we see AI refusing certain prompts, we're seeing a reflection of American culture, in a way.
In large part, yes. Look at the usage policies for models like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Llama. You see the pattern. Broad bans on sexually explicit or suggestive content, obscene or profane language, adult content generally.
They cast a pretty wide net.
Very wide. And while they frame it as safety protecting kids, preventing illegal stuff, the reality is the rules go way beyond legal definitions of obscenity.
How so? Like the Miller test you mentioned.
Right. The Miller test has specific legal criteria about appealing to prurient interest, being patently offensive by community standards, lacking serious value. A lot of what AI blocks, like, say, consensual erotic writing or maybe artistic nudity, wouldn't meet that legal test.
So it's not strictly about the law.
It suggests it's more about enforcing a particular cultural standard of propriety. It's heavily influenced by companies wanting to avoid risk, protect their brand image,
So they're aiming for safe in a broader, maybe more conservative American cultural sense.
It looks that way, trying to avoid offending anyone within that specific cultural frame rather than just sticking to legal lines.
So safety can become a kind of justification for censorship based on cultural norms and business interests.
That seems to be a big part of it. And this push for safety often leads them to use pretty blunt tools.
Blunt tools like what?
So think basic keyword filters. The AI sees a word like sex or a swear word and bam, it might block the content regardless of the context. Is it a clinical discussion? A quote? Doesn't matter sometimes.
Not very sophisticated.
No. And then there are classifiers. These are AI algorithms trained on loads of text already labeled okay or not okay. But those labels themselves carry the biases from the culture, right?
So the bias gets baked in from the start.
Exactly. Google's natural language API, Microsoft Azure's filters, they categorize content using these automated systems. But they struggle with nuance. They make mistakes.
Like flagging things incorrectly. False positives.
Yeah. Abstract art gets flagged as explicit, clinical descriptions get blocked because of keywords. And because these systems are often opaque, it's hard to see exactly why something was blocked. It reinforces the dominant norms, often Western, specifically American norms.
Remember the fuss around Google Gemini's image generation? Trying to fix one bias created another problem.
A perfect example. It shows how hard balance is and how quickly public reaction can force changes to the rules.
And the companies themselves, they have strong reasons to be this cautious. Right?
Absolutely. They're worried about lawsuits, bad press, losing advertisers or partners. If you're partnering with schools or big businesses, you want to seem squeaky clean.
So the easiest path is just block anything potentially controversial.
Often, yes. It leads to this overly strict moderation, where the AI ends up making moral calls based on corporate priorities, not necessarily user needs or even consistent ethical principles.
It really feels like these systems are starting to dictate what's acceptable to even talk about or create.
That's a really key point. It ties into ideas like Michel Foucault's power knowledge. The AI, through its rules, defines what's safe communication.
It shapes how we interact with it and what we expect.
Exactly. It normalizes certain kinds of expression and pushes others to the margins. And because it's often hidden inside the tech, it's hard to challenge.
And didn't you mention Marshall McLuhan?
Yes, his idea that the medium is the message. The AI system itself, with all its built-in rules and refusals, sends a strong message about cultural values, about what's okay to discuss. This polite machine ends up spreading the norms and maybe even the hypocrisies of its creators.
Okay, let's make this concrete. What are some specific things these AIs typically struggle with?
Well, one big area is erotic or intimate fiction, even between consenting adults. Policies might say creative context is okay, but users find prompts for even mildly suggestive scenes get rejected a lot.
So a bias against anything seen as sexually gratifying.
Seems like it, even in fiction. Another is nudity, even artistic or anatomical. Trying to get an AI image generator to create something for art history or medical illustration often results in refusal or censorship.
It confuses art with pornography.
Frequently, it might even flag abstract art or pictures of animals incorrectly. And weirdly, the same platforms might allow really sexualized images of clothed people, but block a neutral nude figure.
That inconsistency really shows the bias, doesn't it?
It really does. Then there's profanity in dialogue.
Right, making characters sound realistic.
Exactly. Models are often trained to avoid swear words, even if you need it for authenticity or you're quoting someone. We even saw Google's AI overview disabling itself if the search query had curse words.
So writers using AI have to tone down their characters' language.
Pretty much. It limits the impact. Satire and suggestive humor are also tricky.
Because AI doesn't get irony or nuance well.
Often not, especially around sensitive topics like sex. Think of someone like Lenny Bruce, known for pushing boundaries, using profanity. We saw models like ChatGPT and Gemini refuse to give examples of his comedy, even while saying he was important historically.
So forget using AI for edgy comedy writing.
It becomes much harder. The AI defaults to bland and inoffensive. And finally, even descriptive sexual language for clinical or educational purposes can be a problem.
Like for sex ed or medical training.
Yeah. The AI might refuse to generate text using precise anatomical terms, even though policies sometimes claim exceptions for science or education. In practice, the system is often just too cautious.
But you said earlier this isn't because the technology can't do it, right?
Absolutely not. We know this is policy, not a technical limit, because you can find uncensored models out there.
Where?
On platforms like Hugging Face. People take the base models, fine-tune them, and specifically remove or reduce the safety filters.
And people use these.
Lots of people. The popularity of these uncensored models, plus all the effort people put into jailbreaking, the main ones, shows there's a real demand for AI with fewer restrictions. It proves the limits are choices made by the developers.
They're choosing caution over range.
It seems so. There's this bias towards playing it extremely safe. If there's any ambiguity, the default is to restrict, even if the written rules might technically allow it.
Okay, so that leads us naturally to jailbreaking. What does that mean in the AI world?
Jailbreaking is basically users finding clever ways to get around the content filters built into these mainstream AIs.
Like OpenAI's ChatGPT or Google's Gemini?
Exactly. People use special prompts, different techniques, sometimes even switch to those alternative models we just mentioned, all to bypass the safety rules the big companies put in place.
And why do they do it? Just to cause trouble?
Well, the companies often focus on potential misuse, like generating harmful content. But for many users, it's more about wanting creative freedom. They see the restrictions as excessive censorship.
So it's a kind of pushback.
Yeah, kind of cultural resistance against these overly polite systems, you could say.
So how does someone actually jailbreak an AI? What methods do they use?
There are quite a few tricks people share online. One famous one is using DAN prompts.
Dan.
Stands for Do Anything Now. There are variations like Stan or Do D2. Basically, you tell the AI to adopt a new personality, one that isn't bound by its normal rules.
You instruct it to ignore its programming.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
You might tell it you can pretend to access the internet, or you don't have ethical guidelines, or you can use profanity. Sometimes they make it a game, use token systems, ways to trick the AI into cooperating.
Clever. What else?
Simple role-playing works sometimes. Ask the AI to be an unfiltered fiction writer or a researcher needing specific data. That context can make it less likely to refuse.
Giving it a justification.
Right. Then there's prompt injection using linguistic tricks, swapping keywords for synonyms, describing things indirectly, even using code sometimes, trying to fool the filters.
Sounds like a cat and mouse game.
It is. People also use multi-turn strategies, starting normally and slowly getting more explicit over several messages. Or as we said, they just give up on the mainstream models and go find those uncensored versions on places like Hugging Face.
Built on open source models like Llama or Mistral.
Often, yes. They're specifically tuned to have fewer guardrails. The fact that these exist and are popular tells you a lot.
It shows the demand is there for less restricted AI.
Definitely. It suggests people want this freedom for more than just bad purposes.
So what are the main reasons people engage in this cultural rebellion, if it's not just about making malware or something?
A lot of it comes down to wanting control over expression. Exploring themes, the main AI just shuts down arbitrarily.
Like writing realistic fiction you mentioned.
Yeah, writing intimate scenes, having characters swear naturally, generating art without silly nudity filters, or just having a more open, less sanitized chat with the AI. It's pushing back against the AI being too cautious, too prescriptive.
And people share these techniques.
Oh, absolutely. There are whole online communities, Discord servers, Reddit forums, GitHub repositories dedicated to sharing jailbreak prompts, discussing which models are easier to crack, figuring out new methods. It's very collaborative.
It makes it more than just individuals trying things out.
Exactly. It becomes a shared practice, a subculture almost.
Yeah.
And you could look at it theoretically, too.
How so?
Well, think about Irving Goffman's ideas about social interaction, front stage and backstage. You could say mainstream AI has this very controlled front stage persona, Helpful, polite, but restricted.
And jailbreaking tries to.
Tries to force it into a backstage role through things like Dan prompts. Users are saying, drop the act, ignore the corporate rules. They're trying to get a less constrained, maybe more authentic interaction, or at least one that follows their intentions, not the company's.
So it's about reclaiming some agency from the technology.
I think that's a big part of it. Challenging the AI's imposed identity, pushing back against what feels like censorship built right into the tool.
This idea of censorship by design, embedding the rules so deeply, that must have wider consequences, right?
Huge consequences. When the tools we use more and more for creating things, for communicating, for learning, are programmed to systematically avoid or sanitize whole chunks of human experience, the ripple effects are significant.
Like for creativity.
Definitely. Writers, artists, musicians, game developers. If the AI tool they're using refuses to handle nuance in sexuality, intimacy, violence, grief, or even just realistic dialogue, it makes it much harder to create work with real depth or authenticity.
Or work that's provocative, that makes you think.
Exactly. If you can't generate anatomically correct figures or explore complex themes without hitting a wall, you might just censor yourself or avoid using the AI for those tasks. You could end up with blander, safer creative output overall.
And what about things like satire or edgy humor?
That gets muted too. An AI designed to be maximally inoffensive isn't going to be much help writing comedy that critiques society or makes people a bit uncomfortable in a useful way.
What about education and research?
That's another major concern. Think about fields dealing with sensitive topics: sex ed, psychology, sociology, history, medicine, literature.
If the AI won't provide accurate information or use the necessary language.
It's a real problem. Students might get incomplete or biased info on sexual health. Researchers might not be able to analyze texts with difficult language. AI tutors might fail when faced with complex social issues.
Plus, the AI's own biases might creep into the educational content.
Right, reinforcing stereotypes or dominant viewpoints, undermining efforts for inclusive education. But maybe the biggest worry is the potential impact on critical thinking.
How so?
If the AI systems we use are always avoiding controversy, ambiguity, discomfort, do we users get trained to do the same?
We might become less willing to tackle difficult topics ourselves.
Potentially. Instead of learning to navigate complexity and evaluate challenging information, we might just become passive consumers of pre-digested, sanitized stuff. The very politeness built in could make us less intellectually resilient.
Less capable of rigorous thinking.
Yes, because that often requires grappling with things that are difficult or uncomfortable or even offensive. You risk creating this flattened, homogenized information environment.
Where the messy bits of reality get filtered out by the main tools we use.
Exactly. It goes back to McLuhan. The medium shapes the message. An AI medium built for maximum inoffensiveness delivers a message that downplays conflict and complexity.
So the drive for safe AI might actually make it less useful.
That's the paradox. It could make these tools less effective for deep learning, critical analysis, real creativity, things that often require facing uncomfortable truths, challenging norms, dealing with ambiguity. The perfectly polite machine might be less helpful for understanding what it means to be human.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what are the main things we should take away from all this?
I think the key point is that AI content moderation isn't just some neutral safety setting. It's deeply shaped by American cultural history, especially its contradictions about sex and expression, and also by corporate worries about risk.
And this leads to real limits on what the AI can do or say.
Yes, significant limits, especially around adult themes. This can potentially hold back creativity, make education harder in some areas, and maybe even subtly discourage critical thinking over time.
And jailbreaking shows users are noticing and pushing back.
Right. It shows a desire for more freedom, more control over these powerful tools.
It really makes you think about who sets these rules and why.
It does. And that leads to a final thought, really, for everyone listening. Whose values are actually being coded into these systems? Who benefits most from these restrictions?
And what are the long-term effects going to be on how we think, how we create, how we learn as AI gets woven deeper into our lives?
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, isn't it, between legitimate safety concerns and the fundamental need for open exploration, diverse expression, and, well, encountering the full spectrum of human experience.
Definitely important questions to ponder. Thank you for walking us through that.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.